big thank you to our loyal attendees who have joined us for a second or even third time, and a really warm welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time today. My name's Andrew Deverell-Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Deverell-Smith, and I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts who can offer some amazing insight into the world of real estate, the property market, and of course the economy. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. To the right, you'll find a chat box and you can submit questions as we go. We're going to be running a couple of polls throughout the session, and we're really keen for as many of you as possible, please, just to click a button which feels right to you, and we'll obviously share the answers that come through as the session progresses. It's going to be a stimulating conversation without doubt. We'll be hearing from a major CFO with a highly esteemed real estate developer, and investor and owner, a divisional chairperson from one of the UK's leading house builders, and a sustainable development powerhouse who, at the age of 24, believe it or not, graced the front cover of Forbes magazine, as well as our regular guest, Rob Elder from the Bank of England, whom we're delighted has joined us again. So I'm not going to tell you our panel's story. I'm going to be quiet. And what I'm going to do is ask, firstly, if it's okay, Becky Worthington from the Canary Wharf Group to come and say hello, and perhaps just give us a couple of minutes on her role and her business, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. So I'm relatively new to Canary Wharf Group. I joined as CFO just over 6 months ago. Although a strong background in regeneration, I spent 15 years at Quintain, and might be useful for some of the questions coming up. 4 years at Countryside in house building, as well as latterly at IQ student accommodation, where we sold the business to Blackstone, and also had a non-exec career, again latterly at British Land, which I stepped down from at the end of the year. Canary Wharf Group is a business that's done some pretty amazing things in terms of the probably best part of 18 million square feet that it's built over the last 30 years. But it's really a business in quite a lot of transition, as well as it evolves into a truly mixed-use 24/7 community with a significant residential angle, both build to sell, but also our build to rent business, which is growing very substantially at the moment. And a couple of weeks ago, we got consent for another 2.5 million square feet of mixed-use flexible build on North Quay, where we're looking at building the tallest vertical wet lab, potentially 500,000 square feet there as a starting point. So there's a huge amount going on from a build, but also a huge amount from sustainability, which is one of our really big focuses, as we want to be the most sustainable developer in the UK. Thank you very much. Look forward to answering your questions.
Right, so that was pretty impressive CV. I've spent a career, my entire career, studying CVs, and wow, that's probably all I can say. Ingrid Osborne, thank you so much for joining us. Would you be happy to jump on and introduce yourself?
Of course. Afternoon, everyone. Nice to be here. So I'm Ingrid Osborne. I'm the divisional chair for London and the South East for Taylor Wimpey. That involves me being responsible for the operational delivery across Central London, Greater London, and the larger South East across 5 business units. So our division would be responsible for delivering between 3,500 to 4,500 homes per year. So obviously that involves continuing to buy a lot of land, build a lot of houses, sell them, and look after an awful lot of customers across our operational business. I'm also the lead for the GMD on our environment strategy, so that's something I've been involved in for the last 18 months or so. And also I'm the chair of the Working Parents Network in Taylor Wimpey UK, which is also a very interesting thing that we launched earlier this year. I've recently become a non-exec director for Notting Hill Genesis. So that's something that's I've just only just joined in the last sort of month or so, actually. So very much looking forward to getting under the skin of that. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, Ingrid, thank you. And again, just an incredible CV and story that you have to tell. So I look forward to discussing all of those topics with you shortly. Last but not least, in terms of our guests, Joseph Michael Daniels. Joseph, would you like to pop on and tell us your story?
Yeah, so firstly, I'm honoured to be alongside the likes of Rebecca, Myron, and Rob and Ingrid. So I'm Joseph Daniels, I founded Utopia in 23 after suffering homelessness between the age 15 and 21. Today, we are the first net zero ESG compliant exportable commodity. Yeah.
Joseph, I just want to interrupt you. I think we might have a little bit of a sound issue. So why don't we try and fix that?
Can you guys hear me clearly now?
You're sounding a little bit robotic, Joseph. So we'll pause with you, and we'll fix your sound issues. And then I'm going to introduce Rob Elder, if that's okay. And Rob can not only introduce himself, but we'll dive straight into Rob's thoughts on the UK economy. Thank you ever so much, Rob. That was fascinating. I was scribbling notes as fast as I could. It was non-stop information and very, very informative. Before we go on to talk about the economy, and I'm going to ask the panel to sort of share their views. They're much more interesting than mine. I want to go back to Joseph, if that's okay. I think we picked your gremlins, and so before we ask you to comment on the economy and world at large, Joseph, tell us your story, if that's okay, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Apologies for the technical error. So my name is Joseph Daniels. I founded Utopia at the age of 23 after suffering homelessness between 15 and 21. Utopia have now become what is being classified as a net zero commodity. We basically combine energy, construction, and IoT technology to create ESG compliant net zero buildings. We've exported across the world to Africa. We're setting up in the Middle East and the USA to really provide communities of the future, product and technology in a way that can be scaled at volume and pace, but also is ESG compliant under the primary and secondary markets, loan market association definition, including the World Bank's Edge Green Building accreditation. So bit of a journey, and I'm proud and actually quite inspired to be here with such an amazing panel.
Well, it's very good of you. Thank you ever so much. I mean, your story is unique in lots of ways, and I'm delighted you were able to join us. Who wants to go first? Becky, perhaps. As the financier in the group, would you like to give us a few thoughts around Rob's comments, and how does that affect your thinking and your role, and how do you think that affects the wider conversation at Canary Wharf?
So it was great to hear from Rob, and I think that what he painted was a fairly benign backdrop that ought to give business a encouragement in terms of the ability to grow, to deliver, to continue to invest. Of course, with all these things, it's not necessarily the main case that's the risk. It's the potential, tail risks that can throw out your plans. And I guess one of the things, if we've all learned nothing from the last 18 months, except this, is actually the agility to be able to respond to those different tail risks, such as COVID pandemic, as it would have been seen if you'd have asked someone 3 or 4 years ago. I think that perhaps one of the biggest limiting factors in that investment and growth for businesses and for real estate at the moment is about resilience of supply chain. And I think, again, perhaps a lesson coming through as we've continued to become more global is actually stopping and questioning whether some of our supply chain actually does need to become more local in order to give us greater resilience. And I think for everyone who's working at the construction end of a business at the moment, whether it's actually labour from, say, dry liners, or whether it's physical material and concrete and glass, those things are holding back some of the recovery that businesses would otherwise be making. So I think as we look at our risk registers and think about our future and agility, I definitely think supply chain and more consideration around supply chain is going to come into that in the future.
Thank you. Becky, one more question before I think I'm going to turn to Ingrid, but Rob mentioned interest rates being tagged to the labour market, and how do you, and the economy is broadly back to, my words, Robert, pre-pandemic level. How is your business functioning, post-COVID, or today as opposed to pre?
I think there's always been a war for talent, but I think that war has never been as intense as it is today. So I think there's a lot of pinching good staff, keeping you very busy, Andrew, no doubt. It is difficult to sometimes retain, incentivize, and recruit, particularly really good people to come into the business, and that's not a Canary Wharf Group thing. That is, everybody I talk to has exactly the same issues. So Big Four accountancy firms pinching each other's tax partners, for example, and it just seems that some people have stood back from COVID and taken a view of actually, maybe they do want a different world and a different lifestyle. And so I think some people have removed themselves from perhaps what they would have been willing to do before in terms of employment, and decided to opt for different futures, which is great for them. And so they should, because people are always the most important thing. However, I think that we really do see a war for talent, and I think we will see probably quite high wage inflation.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I don't want to. I don't want this all to be about talking about attracting great people. Ingrid, thank you, Becky. Thank you, Ingrid. So I think again, interpreting Rob's comments and presentation, I think we expect rates to rise, but modestly from the sounds of things. What's your reaction to that? Is that any kind of surprise? And how do you see the future looking for TW? In the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, largely what I would have expected to hear, I guess, and I think interestingly for me, I was just going to comment on the fact that I think most sort of average people, and talking to customers and talking to colleagues, kind of have that sense as well, that there are headwinds, but it's manageable, and money is relatively easy to source at present. And I think that is playing into this kind of pent up demand, if you like, for people, both in our market, as in the new homes market, but also in the second hand market, which of course goes hand in hand with the new homes market. To actually just want to get on and do something, frankly, given everything that we've all been through over the past 18 months, 2 years. So I think, I always find it interesting thinking about this from a macro perspective and listening to economists and the view, but how that actually translates down onto the ground and what do people really think and feel, I think sometimes is a disconnect. And I don't sense there's that much of a disconnect in this case, which I think is a good thing. And it is really seeing people still committing to making that move. And I think more so than perhaps we've seen in the past few years, people at different stages of their buying journey committing to move. So it's second time movers, starting to make the chains move a bit faster, other than just predominance of first time buyers, etc., that we've seen perhaps for a little while. So I think it gives the market a slightly different dynamic. And just on the other comments that Becky made as well, I mean, certainly commodity pressure is something we're all very aware of, but I'd probably put labour pressure above that, and that translates onto site. So just at the sharp end, and tradespeople, dry liners, bricklayers, etc. And that's partly a bit of a perfect storm of Brexit and COVID and everything else, but also just generally within the industry, keeping and retaining good people is super critical. So I think we're all singing from the same hymn sheet in that respect.
It's like we prompted this, but I can promise you we haven't. And no doubt we'll talk more about labour and labour challenges. I can see the questions are all starting to flow in, which is great. But Joseph, your thoughts on Rob's presentation? How does that affect your thing? I'm not sure if I call you a startup, but certainly a less mature business probably than Canary Wharf and Taylor Wimpey in lots of respect, or a few respects. What did you hear when Rob was speaking?
I think it's definitely a medium-term projection. In that we will settle down. But I think one of the most important things, as Utopia, we're across 4 continents. We're across the Middle East, USA, Africa, and we resource a lot of materials from Asia. And I think that this is a great time for a learning experience. COVID happened, but climate change impact is going to be even larger. You'll see it's no accident that timber's increased 250% in the UK. And in America, they were massively impacted by the Canada fires. And people don't know that was actually one of the big fires is actually one of the forestry areas where they use timber. And therefore, I think it's a great learning opportunity and experience to say what needs to be applied. Consumer patterns of gas price increase, correct, is not going to be a long-term thing. However, gas is going to be a less utilized resource, and therefore how the consumers using it more effectively and investing smarter for the longer term impact. And from a developer perspective, a construction perspective, how are we learning from the inability to localize? How are we learning from this COVID and Brexit impact, but also understanding that raw materials that our industry depend on, such as concrete, such as steel, such as timber, are 3 of the most finite resources and most victim to climate impact. So I think there's a great opportunity in the medium term to look and understand this is potentially an ability for us as a nation to understand the economic impact that not being able to have access is, but also understand that there is mass migrations already happening across India. There are forests burning down, and timber is a resource we use. And how do we apply from an economic mindset, from a consumer behavior and a developer or business behavior? How do we ensure that the ESG mentality that's going forward, which is building resilience into our future supply, how are we taking that on today, and how are we learning from the impact of COVID and Brexit?
I'm hoping you're going to give us the answers as the conversation goes on. For sure, sustainability, ESG is a huge theme in terms of the questions that have been presented to us in the run-up to this event. We're running along nicely, and it's my job also to bring in a couple of these polls. I think now might be a good time to talk about polls, and then I'm going to try and transition the conversation from the economy onto the next theme. So if we can get a poll up on the screen, that would be brilliant. And I think I'm right in saying I'm able to read you what we're asking. In hindsight, do you think the Chancellor's decision to remove stamp duty was a good one? So was the Chancellor's decision to remove stamp duty, what was it, 15 months ago, 18 months ago? Was that a good decision? Yes, no, maybe. So not too taxing a question, but we're really, really interested to see what results come in. You've got 30 seconds, by the way, I'm told, and then you're out of luck. The poll's disappeared, and we're running with that answer. I'm not sure if anybody else is able to see what's coming through, but it looks like the majority of our audience think it was definitely a good decision. 64%, I think, agree, good decision. 29% say not a great decision, and maybes are sitting around 7%. So it looks pretty strong in favour of Rishi's call to drop stamp duty. So, Ingrid, maybe I can come to you on that topic. As a house builder, you really must watch stamp duty or have some pretty firm views around stamp duty. Could you give us some thoughts around it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously from an end user point of view, particularly given the circumstances, I think giving people an incentive and a bit of momentum and into the industry is undoubtedly a good thing. I think that said, we as a company and our CEO Pete Redfern has always been pretty out there in saying that any kind of artificial stimulus, and largely his comments originally were around the Help to Buy program as opposed to stamp duty, but it's the same principle, cannot be a long-term crutch, and it shouldn't be a long-term crutch for the industry. It's something that is there for a point in time, but can be a bit dangerous in itself if it becomes seen as a crutch. So I think from our perspective, yes, whilst it has some short-term impacts, it's along the same lines of Help to Buy, insofar as it's a point in time, and it shouldn't be taken as giving you an artificial view of the market, if you like. So we've obviously been taking a lot of notice of forward-looking trends as opposed to just what's happening on the day, because we obviously get asked a lot of questions about what's going to happen after stamp duty, what's going to happen after Help to Buy, and particularly for the stamp duty example, we were saying, or being asked those questions at the time, well, X% of our forward order book is already post the stamp duty changes being taken away again, and people are still committing, still reserving. The inquiry rates are just as solid as they were before. So to some extent you can get a little bit hung up on the impact it's had without really seeing the reality of an order book and the time frames that is taking into account, and hence really understanding that the demand is longer term than that. So it's not quite as critical as it might first appear, I guess, is what I'm alluding to.
Well, that's really interesting. So you're saying your order book hasn't been affected since the tail off of the stamp relief?
No. So the rates at which we're reserving, the rates at which people are searching for properties, etc., inquiry rates, all the metrics you would expect us to be looking at have remained really, really robust post the different periods where those factors were changing. So that says to us that, and whilst it's a helpful thing, and obviously to individuals and to families it's a big deal, there are still plenty of people out there who are looking further ahead and aren't reliant on that to enable them to buy.
Right. Thank you, Ingrid. Becky, I'm going to move the conversation to you. Same theme, housing still, if that's all right. But obviously we're in the Tory party conference this week. I think it was Labour last week or the week before. I try not to keep up. When will the housing crisis that we get told about on a daily, weekly basis, when will it ever be solved? I mean, I know you're not necessarily a build to sell business, but you must think about these things around your boardroom table. When do you think it will be over?
Well, I think the housing crisis, as it's defined, is perhaps a little bit arbitrary and really doesn't go to the point of where the real biggest need is. And of course, the biggest need is in affordable housing, whether it's sort of big A affordable or small A affordable. But political interference is something that needs to be taken very carefully in terms of interrupting the market and what it does. So I think it's important that that developers, that house builders are encouraged to build very proactively. But I think one has to be careful what one wishes for in terms of things like endless taxes around Section 106 and CIL and affordable housing, because if too much is demanded of house builders, then they get to the point where it's no longer economic and therefore they won't build anymore. So I think it is about creating a very thin set of regulation and rules and requirements, and and demands, but making sure those are really impactful, and so that you actually get the most that you can out of social benefit from the creation of affordable housing, which is where we do have the biggest problem, whilst perhaps government having to put more in terms of infrastructure in itself.
Thank you. I think this is perfect to bring in Joseph, who is an impressive young man disrupting a very established industry. Joseph, what are your thoughts around affordability? And
I think, you know, political intervention is one of the bugbears. Having suffered during being homeless, I was homeless on and off for 4 years. I know exactly what the system is and how the queue of the system works. But when we talk about affordability and you talk about property price inflation and growth and investment, you know, when a factor of 2 to 3 of the average wage is the minimum requirement to buy an average standard home at £285,000, but the realism is that that is only in areas that are outside of usually key working areas for these individuals, that you've got a combined economic crisis that's not going to resolve itself. Can we build 400,000 homes a year? We haven't built since I think 2010, over 2007 actually, sorry, over 189,000 homes. The population growth is still increasing as we move forward. So I don't think it's any more about the housing crisis. It's more about communities and how we engage with them on a local level. Sustainability will solve a number of issues and it will drive innovation, which it will speed up the industry. The lack of that has caused us to rinse and repeat. Let's build brick buildings over and over and over at the same pace we have, because it's good for yields, but it's good for people. So I think political intervention needs to be divided away from the delivery of homes. It needs to be around a community-based approach. And allowing the communities to take control of their housing for the people that meet their needs, because the needs in locations are different. And the digitization of COVID, I must say, allowed a lot of people to move further afield, and therefore housing is more available in better areas for people now.
Okay, so what are you doing that's different to the traditional house building community?
So what we did is I focused on the unlocking of scale and affordability in combination with sustainability. So what happens is we combine many layers of the approach. We then either tell people you need to buy this whole cube asset off of us and we'll maintain it for 25 years, which is unrealistic. Or we say we're going to use 20, 30 things from different parts and we're going to continue doing things a normal way. I innovated in an area of construction which allows twice passive standard, but a third time of the build. And then I included a smart sensor that speaks with the energy meter and the heating system. Effectively, what it means is plug and play. We're working with a number of the biggest developers in Britain, and effectively we will take 35% of their supply chain, but make them all 100% ESG compliant by only taking away 35% of their product. But we'll be using exactly the same methods in terms of construction approach, i.e. using larger panels, but kind of like a bricklayer, and applying heating systems, but using smart sensors. You've got a smartphone, you've got a car that drives itself. Why don't we audit our homes using smart energy? It baffles me. It's an £80 sensor. Using those innovations to actually not try and take over the industry, but to enable the industry and say, well, here we can work with you to meet future sustainability requirements, but instead of trying to change everything, because everyone comes in with a new idea and thinks they can change everything to fix something, and it's not about that. It's about working with Canary Wharf, working with everyone to say, how can we improve it, but also keep the level of quality and consistency and improve volumes. And that's where Utopia are addressing the environmental and economic scale crisis at the moment.
Okay, so one more question for you, and then I'm going to pose the same question to the ladies, if that's okay. When will your organisation, if ever, be carbon neutral?
Unfortunate. We were the first UN Climate Neutral Now initiative net zero company in history. We operationally operate net zero as an organisation. Every asset we've built is either energy positive in status or has been acclimatized to being enabled to be operated in net zero. And then our embodied carbon is actually, we utilize a program of ensuring we offset through renewables and planting. So actually as an organization, it was built into the DNA of our creation, which is very different in comparison to the existing processes that exist, which are extremely hard. And hopefully everyone's just taking baby steps so we can get to the bigger picture.
Well, that's pretty impressive. Rebecca or Ingrid, who wants to go next? Sustainability. Can you talk to us about that, please?
Sure, I could do that. So Canary Wharf Group's made a pledge to be net zero carbon by 2030. obviously we want to try and achieve as much as that, not through high quality offsets, but through actually reducing genuinely our carbon footprint. But this is part of a journey for us, and it's a journey that Canary Wharf has been on for a very long time. So if I just wind back the clock, every building built on this site, every office since 1998 has been BREEAM very good or better. All our most recent buildings are BREEAM outstanding. And I know that is just a mark, but it is actually not just about ticking a box. For Canary Wharf Group, sustainability is part of our DNA and something that we really want to embrace and try and do the best we possibly can. So since 2012, all our electricity has been bought from renewable sources. We've signed up to climate pledges, we've got science-based targets, and we're really engaging with all of our customers on the estate to actually work together, because together, we've got an estate of 128 acres that we manage, and together is where we can make the really biggest impact. So it's actually working with the Morgan Stanleys and Barclays and other big organisations that together we come together and make a really big difference. So there is a long way to go on the journey, but we are absolutely committed to it.
Well done. Do you see a date where the entire estate may be carbon neutral and good for the environment?
That is a difficult one in terms of just the physical embodied carbon within new build. So at the moment, I don't think there's been a path that's been defined that is carbon neutral as opposed to net carbon neutral, i.e. that we still have to go and plant forests and build wind farms and access energy from different sources. But that has to be part of an ongoing journey. And one of the things around that, which the industry really has to embrace, is retrofit. Because, of course, although a building may be less efficient than another building, actually the least efficient thing is to knock it down and build a new building. So how do we use existing buildings? A lot of the buildings on this estate were built to last over 100 years. So thinking about retrofit and thinking about how we can do that, and creating and innovating, working with architects globally and engineers to come together with the best ideas so that it can be done in a cost-effective way, and therefore that we get a better outcome overall.
Thank you. Brilliant. Ingrid, the same question really, same theme certainly. I guess just to put a slightly different slant on it, I wonder, what do you do with your colleagues? Where are you looking for inspiration and innovation when it comes to ESG? I presume you must spend a lot of your time talking and thinking about it. So where do you go to?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's excuse me, an awful lot of R&D projects that we're in the course of undertaking at the moment. But I think from a TW point of view, it's something we've had a pretty good record on, actually, particularly in relation to some of our peers over the years. But we've kind of come to the point now where we have science-based targets too, as you would imagine. Well, not everybody has actually, but we have for our carbon emissions intensity reductions. We also have stated objectives in terms of natural habitats and how we're going to improve those over the coming years, and some very challenging figures on waste reduction. So those sort of three pillars that you would expect, but just sort of to make it a bit more interesting, I was just going to say what we're really focusing on next, or behind the scenes, is we've kind of concentrated historically on the easier to get at stuff, which we should have, because it's more within our control. So why wouldn't you? But I mean, the reality is for the industry that represents a very, very small proportion of the carbon emissions we're actually making. The scope 1, something like 1 or 2%, is very small comparative to supply chain and end user. So that's really where the big prize is. And it's a lot harder to get at. So we've sort of set ourselves some very stretching internal targets to understand more about our baselines in that respect, and working with our suppliers, starting to think about how we engage differently with our customers, so that we can start making inroads into that, which is really the big prize. Because whichever way you look at it, the point is to do with the global environment, isn't it? And if you're doing your bit to kind of get at the bigger part, then I think that's where we see it for the future. So thinking about some of those upcoming issues and other, like air quality, for example, that's very much a rising issue. There's all manner of things I could talk for a while, but I think the point I'm trying to make is there's lots of targets and aims, which is all great, but I think we've all as well got to try and think of a way in the coming years to get at the harder to get at stuff, because that's where the biggest result will be.
Well, it's not going away, is it? I mean, I'm certain of that, and we find ourselves on our travels talking about these things more and more in the boardroom. Rob.
Andrew, thanks. I just wanted to come in very quickly and just talk about the Bank of England on climate change. And I just wanted to say that, of course, as part of government, we're completely supportive of the government's target on net zero. But two things that the Bank of England have been doing to try and promote that, which I just wanted to highlight to you. First of all, obviously, this is a global problem. And there's an organization called the Financial Stability Board, which is across the world, all the advanced countries, including China and other sort of major sort of emerging markets, are part of that group. And we've been helping to drive through the task force on climate related disclosure, financial disclosure. And the key thing there is we're trying to get a kind of a global agreement on how businesses report their climate exposures, and we hope that way we will create incentives for businesses to deliver on reducing emissions. So one thing is to try and get that financial infrastructure right, and we've been working internationally to try and get that sorted. The other thing the Bank of England has been doing is stress testing the financial system in the UK for climate change. And so what we've been doing is talking to the major banks and insurers in the UK about what their exposures might be to climate change. So, for example, if they've lent money to a business that's going to find that as regulations change, it will get into possibly a lot of difficulty, we want them to sort of think about what that means now. And again, this is all about creating the right incentives so that the financial pressures on businesses help them conform with what we're all trying to achieve. Thanks.
Would you mind if I just have a little, I've read something amazing, Rob, that you just mentioned there is that globalized climate piece, because it's so critically important. And I'd say bringing it to construction real estate is, we had to work with the World Bank's Edge Green Building Accreditation, because to get ESG financing or green funds to reduce your lending and be compliant, an EPC will only get you up to £5 million. So we've worked with Homes England, Lloyds, and etc. And what we realised is that without looking at a global system such as Edge and the World Bank, we were ineffective, because we were sending out buildings internationally with EPCs. And actually, when you send them out of the field, and you kind of start realising how flawed EPCs are. And then we had to say, well, how do we work with an organisation that is looking at that bigger picture stuff, because we are, we're one world. And Rob, I didn't realize that what was going on. As someone that's, trying to pioneer stuff, it's incredible to hear the Bank of England is so at the forefront in climate change, working with world organizations, and it inspires me to want to continue to drive. It's great to hear.
Couldn't agree with you more, Joseph. I think that's really, really exciting. I wasn't expecting you to pop in with that, Rob. So well done. Poll number 2, if that's all right. I'm conscious we're flying through the time, so I'm instructed to ask the second poll, which is as follows. What do you think the main focus of the real estate industry should be in the next 12 months? So that's ask our audience. What do you think the main focus of the real estate industry should be in the next 12 months? And I'm told I was a bit stingy last time, giving you 30 seconds. So I'm now allowed to give you 45 seconds. It's obviously it's a tougher question because we've given you 4 choices rather than 3. But the results are starting to fly in. So should they be sustainability? Should it be the housing crisis? Should it be profit? Or should it be design and innovation? And it's moving around a little bit, I can tell you that much. And it's closer than the last time, I can tell you that also. Here we go, 1 second left. So the results are in. The answers are as follows. Sustainability comes out top at 43%. The housing crisis comes out second at 35%. Design and innovation comes third with 20%, and profit 6%. I think the CFO should comment on profit.
Is that one for me? Well, if I'd been putting my vote down, which I am now, I would have gone with design and innovation. And the reason I would do that, and you might say this is a cheating answer, but actually it is through really good design and through innovation that we can actually tackle these challenges. It's through innovation we need to tackle sustainability. It isn't about saying, okay, we're all going to live in mud huts, so that's fine, we won't have climate change. It's actually about how we genuinely innovate and develop to be able to create sustainable buildings. And the housing crisis is also about innovation. We've had several sort of reasonable attempts at modular housing of one sort or another over an extended period of time. Nobody's quite got it right yet. There isn't a perfect formula that's out there working, but it's something we can't give up on. We have to keep pushing and trying, because it is the future of construction. It is crazy the way that we currently build, even though it's how we've been doing it for the last 200 years. And actually, by integrating highly sustainable products and a good supply chain and proper modular construction, you actually solve the housing crisis and make more money.
Good answer. Innovation. I agree. Yeah, that fixes kind of all of those problems if we come up with best ideas. We're into our last 10 minutes, and as a result, I'm going to try and pick up the pace because we've got so much that we wanted to cover. And I've just been handed by my glamorous assistant to the right, you can't see him, 2 questions from our audience, both actually towards Ingrid, if that's all right. So I'm going to read them both out. One is from Jamie and one is from Bryn. Ingrid, are your buyers downsizing and moving from richer areas to more affordable areas? That's question 1.
It's hard to answer it very sort of simply. In a nutshell, not really. We tend to find that it's still a truth that in the majority of cases, and there are exceptions, but in the majority of areas, buyers come from within 10 miles. Really?
So the whole sort of flight from city to country, is that something that's slowed down as the pandemic has subsided?
I don't agree with the flight from city to country, so that's probably the wrong starting point.
That never happened. Okay.
I just don't think it's happened. No, well, certainly not to the extent that it's commonly assumed to have happened by certainly some parts of the media. But from what we've seen, yes, there are some people who have moved out, further out, but people have always done that, haven't they? If you have a family, you prefer a garden, and etc., etc. So there's been an acceleration, I think, perhaps of trends that already existed, and perhaps a differing level of importance to certain features of the home. So, for example, the size of outside space, if it's an apartment, has it got a balcony? How close is it to a park? Things like that. So, for example, 2 of my fastest selling developments across my entire patch are in Greater London, and they're predominantly apartment schemes, but they're right next to lovely, massive, great big parks, as well as amenities and etc., etc. Not everybody wants to live half an hour away from the shops and the doctors, or whatever else it is, and it's for some people it's the antithesis of what they want. So I just don't agree with the general concept that everybody has moved out. So I guess that's probably my starting point.
So fake news, in the words of my least favourite politician, on the migration.
I think overdone. I think there's been an element of that, and certainly have some people bought, for example, second homes in other places. Yes, perhaps they have, and some people have moved out because but it's almost impossible to know to what extent were they just going to do that anyway, because and it's a slightly accelerated choice. But I think predominantly it's still largely down to your lifestyle drivers, your life stage, or what you're interested in, what's happening in your world. So yeah, I mean, we can only really, from my perspective, the most compelling evidence is what we can see in terms of who's buying where on our sites, and and obviously we keep up to speed with how competitors are doing, and it's just not true to say that Greater London particularly is particularly badly affected, like it's being made out to be.
Okay, well that's amazing, and you would know, you're sitting on all of the data. Rob, I'm going to pose this question to you. I may or may be overstepping the mark here, but it's one around affordability, and I'm sure the bank looks at affordability of everything, I suppose, in one way or another. Simon Scott from Origin Housing has asked, is there room for higher house price inflation when affordability for first-time buyers is already stretched to the limit?
So thanks, Andrew. It's a great question. So the policy of the Bank of England is to deliver consumer price inflation close to our target of 2%, and also to try and deliver financial stability. So we do think about the UK housing market in terms of, could the debt associated with buying houses cause some sort of financial problem? So, for example, could it be that UK households become so indebted they can't repay their mortgages, they can't afford them? Or could it be that the banks have lent so much money that they get into difficulty? And in order to avoid the risk of runaway growth in UK debt that might be caused by the fact that interest rates are so low, for many years, the Bank of England has a policy of restricting excessive borrowing in the housing market. And that's, if you like, because we're worried about the risks that might be posed by low interest rates causing a boom in house prices or a boom in borrowing. So there are restrictions in place. We say that we don't want banks to give mortgages that are very high relative to people's incomes, and so only a small proportion of their lending is allowed to be that way. And we also encourage people to have a kind of stress test when they're taking out mortgages to make sure that they could afford their mortgage even if interest rates were to go up by something like 3 percentage points. So I would say our policies are based on trying to deliver stability rather than thinking specifically about affordability. And we think that if we get stability right, that will allow the economy to meet people's needs, which includes getting those houses built and meeting that housing shortage. But we ourselves can't be responsible for a housing shortage because we have no control over how many houses are built and what happens to population growth, etc. So I think we're responsible for financial policies, and we are worried about the risk of low interest rates causing massive house price growth. But aside from that, we're not responsible for things like planning and the building of houses.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you again for joining us for the third time. We're really so lucky to have a direct line into the Bank of England and how the bank thinks. And it's truly fascinating. So thank you. Now, panel, we're going to go really fast. We've got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to rattle through questions. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring the subject to talent or talent related things, because you touched on it without any real prompting earlier. But wherever possible, as close to one word or sentence answers, because I want to get through 3 or 4 questions here in one go. And I'll start with you, Becky, and followed by Ingrid. How do we get more women into senior leadership roles within the construction or real estate industry? How do we do that?
I'm not sure there is one word for that. Look, it's a challenge. It's a challenge on every front. You need role models. You need positive policies to encourage people so that women are seen in industries that typically were very male dominated. And then you need to encourage women right from the bottom, coming up through strong graduate schemes, and encouragement through potential life choices such as having a family.
Thank you. Ingrid?
Yeah, I mean, we could be here for ages, couldn't we? But basically, I agree. I think certainly attraction. How do you get more people in at the grassroots, and understanding what the industry can offer, and then how do you support those people as they go through different parts of their lives, and looking at certainly different family-friendly type policies. What can companies do a bit better to assist with that? They would be the 2 things, off the top of my head.
Thank you, Joseph. Same theme, but we're going to just switch the question slightly. What skill set do you feel is most lacking or most in demand today in your business and 5 years in the future?
Can I just say as well, I'm a 29-year-old person in the construction industry, and 2 or 3 of my absolute heroes in this industry are women. So I do think also there is a migration. You know, yourself, Rebecca, Alexandra Note, yourself, Ingrid, there's all the top players right now for me, I'm looking at and saying female leaders in our industry, to be honest with you.
Correct.
Technical skills, very simple. The most required skill at the moment, in my opinion, is gamification and carbon understanding. And schools don't teach carbon understanding. It's insane. Games are the most utilized technology or utilized tools per hour under the age of 25, and it's the most simplest way to get true results in the real world. So I'd say that today is a need, and then going forward, it's upskilling. Like going forward, the design tools we were using today alone, never mind 5 years ago, completely revolutionized compared to what the market knows at the moment. So upskilling is going to be critical in 5 years' time.
Guys, we're already there. It's 1:30, and you're all very, very busy, important people. So I don't think I can keep asking you questions. I'd love to. I haven't gotten through anywhere nearly enough of them, and that says a lot about my comparing skills. But I'd like to thank everybody, an awful lot really, for joining me and us today. Most importantly, our panel of esteemed, amazing, super cool people. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you ever so much, and go and have a great afternoon.